My stepdad demanded $400 rent on my 18th birthday. But when I checked my dead father's papers, I discovered I was the real owner and he'd been living in my house without knowing it. I'm 18 years old, studying engineering at a public university, and about 6 months ago, my life turned into total chaos because of a house I didn't even know was legally mine. The thing is, my stepdad, Kevin, who's been married to my mom since I was like 8 years old, decided that now that I was legally an adult, I had to start paying rent. And basically, that unleashed a series of events that ended up revealing family secrets I probably would have preferred never to know. But anyway, I guess I should start from the beginning, when my biological dad, Daniel, died and I was barely 6 years old. I don't remember much about my dad, to be honest. Just fragments like when he'd take me to the park or when he taught me to ride a bike, things like that. But what I do remember perfectly is the funeral, and how my mom Amanda cried non-stop for days on end. After that, everything changed, obviously. It was just her and me living in the house my dad had bought like 2 years before he died. A normal, 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood. Nothing fancy, but it was our home. My mom worked as a secretary at an accounting office, and honestly, she did what she could to keep us afloat, or at least that's what I thought at the time. When Kevin appeared in our lives, I was like 8 years old, I think. And at first I liked him because he was nice to me and made my mom laugh again, something I hadn't seen in a long time. They got married when I was 9 and Kevin moved in with us to the house, started working in used car sales, and things seemed to be going pretty well for several years. I grew up thinking Kevin owned the house together with my mom. They never told me otherwise, and I was a kid, so it's not like I was going around asking about property titles or legal stuff. You know what I mean? Kevin always talked about the house like it was his. Like he'd say things like, "I need to fix the roof," or "I'm going to paint the garage." You know, those kinds of phrases that make you assume he's the owner. My mom never corrected him or explained anything different to me, so basically I grew up with that idea stuck in my head. The relationship with Kevin was good most of the time. I mean, we had our normal fights like any stepfather and stepson, I guess, but nothing serious. Nothing that made me think things were going to explode the way they exploded. It all started literally on my 18th birthday. We were having dinner. My mom had made chocolate cake, which is my favorite, and Kevin suddenly drops the bomb in the middle of dinner. He said something like, "Well, Noah, now that you're legally an adult, we need to talk about your contribution to the house." And I was like, "What?" Because I didn't know what he was talking about exactly. Then Kevin explained that he expected me to start paying rent now that I was of age, like $400 a month, which according to him was a bargain considering market prices. My mom stayed quiet looking at her plate, and that seemed weird to me, but at that moment, I thought maybe they had already discussed it, and she agreed. I was working part-time at a coffee shop while studying, so technically I could afford that amount, but I was really annoyed by the way he said it, like I was just any tenant, and not his stepson who had lived there his whole life. I got pretty angry, to be honest, and told him it seemed unfair that he'd charge me rent in the house where I'd grown up, but Kevin insisted, saying it was important that I learn financial responsibility and blah blah blah, all that speech about, "You're a man now, and you have to contribute." We argued for a while, and I finally went to my room, furious thinking Kevin was a cheapskate who just wanted to get money out of me. But then I remembered something my mom had mentioned years ago, when I was like 12 or 13, something about some papers my dad Daniel had left for me that were kept in a safe deposit box at the bank. I had never paid much attention to that because I was a kid, and it seemed boring to me. But that night, after the birthday dinner, I kept thinking about it and decided maybe I should check those documents to see what they were exactly. The next day I went to the bank where my mom had the safe deposit box. Turns out I was authorized to access it since I turned 18, and when I opened it I found a bunch of legal papers I didn't really understand. There was a will, some certificates, and most importantly, a deed to the house in my name. The deed clearly said that Daniel, my biological dad, had put the house in my name when I was 6 years old, right before he died, with my mom, Amanda, as trustee until I turned 18. So, basically, the house had been legally mine all this time and I didn't even know it. Can you believe it? I sat there in the private room at the bank reading and rereading the documents like 5 times because I couldn't process the information. It was literally surreal. When I got home that afternoon, Kevin was watching TV in the living room and my mom was making dinner in the kitchen. I sat in front of Kevin and told him very calmly, "We need to talk about the rent you asked me for yesterday." He looked at me kind of annoyed, like I was going to beg him not to charge me. But then I dropped the bomb on him. I told him, "The thing is, I can't pay you rent, Kevin. But you and my mom are going to have to pay me rent, because it turns out I'm the legal owner of this house." The face Kevin made was epic, honestly. First he laughed, thinking it was a joke. Then he got confused. And finally he got angry when I pulled out the papers and showed them to him. My mom came running out of the kitchen when she heard the commotion and went completely pale when she saw what was happening. Kevin didn't believe me at first. He kept laughing nervously, saying that was impossible, that he had been living there for years and nobody had told him anything, that surely the papers were wrong or outdated. But I showed him the dates, the signatures, everything was perfectly legal and current. Then I decided to play along and told him, "Since we're talking about rent, I think it's fair that you two start paying me for living in my house. Let's say $800 a month between the two of you. What do you think, Kevin?" It was petty of me, I admit, but I was so angry about the way he had tried to charge me that I couldn't resist. My mom started crying and Kevin turned red with rage, yelling that this was disrespectful and that he had paid for many things in the house for years. To which I responded, "Well then, consider it back rent for all those years." Things were tense for weeks after that confrontation. Kevin barely spoke to me, and my mom tried to act like everything was normal, but you could tell she was super uncomfortable with the whole situation. I didn't force them to pay me rent, obviously. I'm not that cruel, but I also didn't tell them to forget about it because I wanted them to understand they had been totally out of line trying to charge me first. One day, like 3 weeks later, I was in my room studying when I heard my mom talking on the phone in her room, and since the walls aren't that thick, I could hear part of the conversation without meaning to. She was saying things like, "We can't tell him the truth yet, and he can't find out about this, or it's going to make everything worse." And that immediately set off all my alarms because they were clearly hiding something else. I started paying more attention to the conversations between Kevin and my mom, trying to catch anything weird or out of place. Like 2 days after that mysterious phone call, I saw Kevin leave the house on a Saturday morning when supposedly he had the day off from work. It seemed suspicious to me, so I decided to follow him. I know, it sounds super invasive and it was probably wrong of me, but I had this feeling that something didn't add up and I needed to know what it was. I followed him in my car, keeping a safe distance, like in the movies, but more amateur, obviously, and I saw him park in front of a coffee shop downtown. He met with a guy I had never seen, a man like 50 years old in a suit, and they were talking for almost an hour while I watched them from my car like a total stalker. At the end of the meeting, I saw the guy hand Kevin a folder with papers, and Kevin reviewed the documents right there at the table before putting them in his backpack. That night at dinner, I decided to confront them directly because I was fed up with the secrets and mysterious conversations. I told them, "Okay, I need you to explain what's going on because I know you're hiding something. And don't play dumb. Because I saw Kevin meeting with someone this morning, and I know my mom has been having weird phone conversations about keeping secrets." My mom started crying again, which was starting to be an annoying pattern, honestly, and Kevin looked between angry and defeated at the same time. There was a super long silence, probably like 2 full minutes, where nobody said anything and I just heard the kitchen clock going tick-tock while I waited for someone to speak. Finally, my mom took a deep breath and dropped something I never expected to hear. She said, "Noah, there's something we haven't told you about the house. There's $80,000 in mortgage debt that your father left without paying completely before he died." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach because $80,000 is a brutal amount of money, especially for an 18-year-old working at a coffee shop making like $12 an hour. I asked her how it was possible there was so much debt and why nobody had told me anything all these years, and my mom explained that when Daniel died, the house wasn't even close to being paid off, that he had bought the property with a minimum down payment, and basically the plan was to pay the mortgage for 30 years, but he only managed to pay for like 2 years before, dying of a sudden heart attack. Kevin then admitted that the guy he had met with was a financial advisor because he had been considering refinancing the mortgage or taking out a second mortgage to consolidate the debts, but obviously now that he knew the house was legally mine, he couldn't do any of that without my permission. He explained that for years he had been making the monthly mortgage payments, like $1,200 a month approximately, and that's why he felt he had the right to charge me rent now that I was an adult, because in his mind he had been paying for the house all this time even though it wasn't legally his. Honestly, part of me understood his frustration, because $80,000 in years of monthly payments is no small thing. But another part of me was still angry because they never told me anything, and now suddenly it was my problem to solve this shitty situation. I spent several days not sleeping well, thinking about what to do with all this information. $80,000 seemed like an impossible amount to pay, especially because I was just starting college and had no savings or anything like that. I decided to call a financial advisor myself, someone different from the guy Kevin had consulted, because I wanted a neutral opinion on my options. The advisor was named Richard, a man like 60 years old who worked at the bank where my dad's safe deposit box was, and when I explained the whole situation to him, he told me I had several options, but none were particularly good. I could sell the house and use the money to pay the debt, but that meant losing my dad's legacy and basically leaving us all homeless. I could try to refinance like Kevin had suggested, but being under 21 and with no credit history, that was going to be almost impossible. Or I could keep making the monthly payments for the next 10 or 15 years until the debt was completely paid off. We had a family meeting with Richard at the bank like a week after my initial discovery about the debt. Richard presented us with a detailed payment plan that basically required that between Kevin, my mom, and me, when he started earning more money, we continue paying the mortgage religiously for the next 10 to 15 years, depending on how much we could contribute monthly. The projection showed that if we only paid the minimum required, it would take 15 years. But if we made occasional extra payments, we could reduce that time to 10 years or even less. All of that assuming none of us lost our jobs, that there were no medical or financial emergencies, and that basically everything went perfectly for the next decade and a half, which frankly seemed pretty unrealistic considering how life is. I left that meeting feeling totally devastated and overwhelmed because the reality of the situation had finally hit me full force. This wasn't just a dramatic story about discovering you owned a house. It was a massive financial commitment that was going to probably define the next 15 years of my life. That night, I stayed up until 3 in the morning looking for alternatives on the internet, reading personal finance forums, calculating numbers over and over again, trying to find some magic solution that didn't involve selling my dad's house or enslaving myself financially for more than a decade. And then I had an idea that sounded crazy, but maybe could work. What if we rented out the whole house to someone else and we moved to a cheaper place? I presented the idea to Kevin and my mom the next day during breakfast. I told them, "Look, I've been thinking and I believe the only way to get out of this without sinking completely is to rent this house to a family that can pay like $2,000 or $2,500 a month, which is the market price for a house this size in this neighborhood. And with that, we could cover the $1,200 mortgage and use the rest to pay extra to the principal, which would significantly reduce the time it'll take to pay off the complete debt. Meanwhile, the three of us could move to a smaller, cheaper apartment, split the rent 3 ways, and basically live more austerely until the house is paid off." Kevin at first hated the idea because it meant admitting he couldn't keep the family in the house. He had considered his for years. But my mom surprisingly agreed with me after thinking about it a bit. During the following weeks, I got to work, preparing the house to rent it out. I painted some walls that looked kind of ugly, fixed small things that were broken, cleaned everything thoroughly, basically did what I could to make the house look presentable for potential tenants. Kevin helped a little with the repairs, although you could tell he resented the whole situation, and my mom took care of packing our personal stuff and finding a 2-bedroom apartment that cost less than $1,000 a month. I put an ad on several rental platforms and started showing the house to interested people. It was exhausting because I had to coordinate the visits around my classes and my work, but after like 3 weeks of searching, I found a perfect young couple, Chris and Emma, newlyweds who were looking for a house to start their life together. They loved the property, passed the credit check without problems, and we agreed on a rent of $2,200 monthly with a 1-year renewable contract. I thought things were finally starting to improve, and that maybe we could overcome this family crisis without killing each other. But it turns out the universe had other plans, because just when we were about to sign the contract with Chris and Emma, the bank called us for an urgent meeting. Richard, the financial advisor, told us he had discovered something during a routine audit of the house account, something that apparently my mom had forgotten to mention or had been deliberately hiding. There was an additional lien on the property for $50,000 that my mom had taken out like 5 years ago, supposedly for a medical emergency, but that she had never told me existed. $50,000 additional dollars meant the total debt wasn't $80,000 but $130,000. Can you believe it? I turned to look at my mom in that bank office and asked her how it was possible she hadn't mentioned this to me in any of our conversations about the house debt, and she started crying again, saying she was afraid I would get angrier and that she didn't want to add more stress to the situation. Kevin also looked surprised, so apparently he didn't know about this secret lien either, or at least that's what he said at that moment. Although I don't know what to believe from anyone in my family anymore, honestly. Richard explained to us that the lien had been taken out when I was 13, that my mom as trustee had had the legal authority to do it until I turned 18, and that now that lien was accumulating interest and would eventually have to be paid along with the original mortgage. The confrontation I had with my mom after that meeting was probably the worst we've had in my entire life. I yelled horrible things at her that I regret now. Like I told her she had betrayed my dad's memory by mortgaging his legacy without even having the decency to tell me that I could never trust her again. That she had destroyed any chance I had of having a stable financial life. She tried to explain that the medical emergency had been real, that she had needed the money for a surgery for Kevin that insurance didn't cover completely, but I was too furious to listen to reasons at that moment. Kevin stayed quiet during the whole fight, probably because he knew if he opened his mouth I was going to explode at him too. The following weeks were absolute hell of family tension. We moved to the small apartment as we had planned. Chris and Emma moved into the house and started paying rent, but the atmosphere between the three of to us was toxic. I barely spoke to my mom beyond what was strictly necessary. Kevin and I avoided each other completely, and basically we lived like three strangers, sharing a space that was too small. The rent money started coming in every month and I religiously used it to pay the mortgage plus an extra to the principal as I had planned. But now, knowing the debt was $130,000 instead of $80,000, the calculations I had made about how long it would take to pay everything off were completely wrong. Instead of 10 to 15 years, we were potentially looking at 20 years or more, depending on how much extra we could pay each month. It's been like 6 months since I discovered all this, and things are a bit better between us, but definitely not what they were before. My mom and I have had long conversations about trust and forgiveness, and although I'm still angry with her for hiding the lien, I also understand she was in an impossible situation trying to support the family after my dad died. Kevin and I have reached a weird understanding where he keeps paying a proportional part of the apartment expenses, and I handle everything related to the house and the tenants. We're not close or anything, but at least we're not yelling at each other every other day like at the beginning. Chris and Emma are excellent tenants. Honestly, they always pay on time and take care of the house better than we did when we lived there, probably. Every time I receive their monthly payment, I feel a weird mix of pride and sadness. Pride, because I'm handling this situation like an adult and doing my best to save my dad's legacy. But sadness because the house where I grew up now has strangers living in it, and I don't know if I'll ever be able to live there myself again. Sometimes I drive by the neighborhood just to see the house from outside, and I wonder if my dad would be proud or disappointed with how I handled all this. He left that house to give me security and stability, but what he managed to do was hand me a massive debt and family secrets that almost destroyed my relationship with my mom. The debt is still there, huge and threatening like a dark cloud over my future. I've done the calculations 1,000 times, and if everything goes perfectly, if there are no emergencies or problems, if Chris and Emma renew the contract year after year, if I get a better paying job after I graduate, then maybe, just maybe, I can have the house completely paid off by the time I'm like 35. 17 years from now, more than half my life up to this point, committed to paying a debt I inherited without knowing it. Sometimes I wonder if I should just sell the house and forget about all this drama. Use the money to pay off the debts and start over without that weight on top of me. But every time I think about doing it, I remember the few memories I have of my dad in that house, and I can't do it. I simply can't let go of the only tangible thing I have left of him. The other day, I was reviewing again the papers I found in the bank's safe deposit box, those documents that started all this craziness, and I found a letter my dad had written for me that somehow I had overlooked the first time. In the letter, he said things about how he hoped the house would give me a safe place to grow up and eventually start my own family, about how he had worked hard to buy it thinking of my future, about how he loved me and wanted the best for me. I cried reading that letter, cried like I hadn't cried in years, because my dad had had the best intentions, but in the end, he had left me with a burden that sometimes I feel is too heavy to carry. But then I think that he couldn't know he was going to die so young, that he didn't have time to pay off the house like he had planned, that he did the best he could with the time he had. So I keep going forward, making payments month after month, trying to rebuild my relationship with my mom, coexisting with Kevin in this, a small apartment that none of us really want as a permanent home. I have no idea if I'm going to be able to maintain this plan for the next 2 decades, if Chris and Emma are going to stay, or if I'm going to have to look for new tenants every year, if more secrets or more hidden debts are going to emerge that nobody has told me about yet. The only thing I know is that house, my dad's house, is legally mine, and I'm going to do everything possible to keep it no matter how long it takes or how difficult it is. Maybe it's a stupid promise considering all the stress and drama it's caused, but it's the promise I made to myself the day I found those papers at the bank. And I don't plan to break it now.